Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So first, before we get started, just welcome everyone. The purpose of tonight is what we call, this is sort of our first budget workshop. So this is really to be engaging between the board and the administration here. We will have an opportunity for public comment at the end. Just want to remind everyone for tonight, because we don't have one of the board members here, so we're doing a recording. This is the first time we're doing this. So what's happening, you are not being recorded in terms of your physical presence, but the screen's being recorded, so the presentation, as well as all the sound. So when you talk, if you can talk into the microphone, so our good friend Tim back there, he's somewhere back there, he's taking care of all the sound, and they're going to blend the two together. So we'll have this available for the board member, Selena, who won't be here, as well as for any other members of the public that would like to watch this. We'll probably publish it on the website, hopefully on or before Friday. So just remember that as you're talking. The format for tonight, so again, most of the work's going to happen here. So it's really both presentation and conversation. What we mean by that is I'm just kind of teeing up the format here. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Roush. She's going to start us out. Each cabinet member will have a different opportunity based on the content. They're going to talk about different things, and they'll rotate through based on whatever their content is, and if there's a specific question, if we have to go back and forth, the appropriate person would respond. Board's encouraged to ask questions throughout the entire presentation. So there's not a good time or a bad time. Whenever you feel the time, either write it down, you can wait for a pause, or you can just raise your hand, however you want to interject. This meeting's for all of you, board members, to ensure that you have a good understanding of what, not only what we're calling tonight, and I'll orient you to that information in a minute, is what we're calling our budget blueprint. So it's really not only a picture for the short term, but also for the long term, as has been mentioned in many meetings for the last several months. We do have an opportunity for public comment at the end, so it's scheduled from 8:30 to 9. However, if we get done sooner, you can move into that public comment if you'd like. I'll turn that back over to you at that point, Dr. Gallagher, so whatever's appropriate. If we don't have an opportunity, then you can make a decision based on the time. So let me just orient you to what you have in front of you, as well as the public, and how this will work for the public that's sitting over there. So for the board members, you should have 3 documents in front of you. So don't worry if you don't have to look at the screen. So you have the board has a full page copy of the presentation in front of you. The public also has that same presentation, although theirs is modified to save on paper, but they have the exact same slides. So it's probably best that you follow through this. It'll also be going at the same time on the screen. Also, one of your takeaways for tonight, and again, these are all available for the public. We have our infographic that talks about our story, as well as which you'll hear about soon, is what we're calling our budget priorities. And we'll get to that a little bit sooner, and this will tie back to a lot of the presentation that you'll hear this evening. And then this big ledger piece of paper, which is all the financial investments that tie into our priorities, and we'll review that in a little more detail as we get towards the end of the presentation. So everyone has that out in the public as well as the board. So everyone has the same thing. We're all going to work off the same sheet of music. So let me tell you what you're going to learn tonight, or what we're going to be talking about. So part 1, these first couple of slides are not in your PowerPoint, so these are just the tee-up slides. So part 1 is what we're going to call the strategic blueprint, the strategic budget blueprint. So it's going to start off, Dr. Rao is going to tell us about our story, who we are as a district. And then we're going to talk to you about what our priorities are, and you heard some of that in the fall, but we're going to show you how that's changed a little bit over the last several months as we've been working diligently on this process. And that's going to be broken out into, you're going to see the same things, and Dr. Powell will talk about how these slides are structured when she starts off on her first part of the presentation. But you're going to see that everything's broken out into 3 sort of time tiers, which is short-term, mid-term, and long-term. And you're going to see that throughout your presentation. It's all very consistent as we move through. And then throughout the presentation, you're going to see the same things. We're going to talk about what the need is based on the priority. What are the strategies? What are the do's? What is the district going to do? What are the outcomes that we expect? And then what are the investments that are needed for that? So that's all part 1. That's what you're going to hear about. So that all makes sense as you start to hear the different parts of the presentations. And then part 2, which after a lot of the cabinet members talk, and then I'll come in at the end and review a lot of the financial information, we're going to tell you what's the impact of the strategic budget blueprint, and what does it take, and how does it impact our deficit, and what our current financial resources are now, and sort of wrap that all up at the end. So we anticipate This takes about an hour and a half if we were just talking straightforward, an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half. So with the board having conversation with us, you probably can expect this will go on for at least about 2 hours, if not a little bit longer. So I just want to get you framed up for that as we embark on this process. Any initial questions before I turn it over to Dr. Rao? So Dr. Rao, I'm going to pass the mic to you.
Give me wait time.
Okay, that's fine, wait time. So I'll introduce Dr. Rao, our superintendent, who's going to talk to us about our story.
Thank you, Matt. Tonight, we are here to share what we believe are the most important budget priorities for the district. We have heard from principals and staff that we need to stay the course and not add new priority areas. We have heard from you that you want us to be strategic in planning a long-term budget to enable you to make strategic planning decisions around our budget. I want to tell you that we've listened to that feedback. Based on that feedback, we plan to stay consistent in our work over the next few years. Our budget priorities are aligned to the board's goals and our strategic priorities. And while our strategic priorities remain the same, we have consolidated them into 4 budget priorities. We will remain focused on standards-aligned instruction, improving instructional practices that engage all students, and enhancing the social-emotional development of our students, all in an effort to improve their outcomes for life success. These priorities are executed primarily by building the capacity of our staff, aligning our resources to needs, and creating more effective systems that support the work in schools so that all of our students are successful on their road to college or career. We have also been digging deeply around the issue of equity. This focus is related to both social-emotional learning and increasing academic outcomes of our students. We have been examining our practices and looking into root causes. We have a team that has been leading the study around equity and bias and how these affect our students. The students themselves have said that they feel discrimination at times. We've also collected feedback from focus groups that include staff, community members, faith-based leaders, and others that have identified equity and implicit bias as areas we need to address. Our achievement and suspension rates demonstrate disproportionality in outcomes for several of our groups of students. You have also said that this is important, so you made it your first board goal: ensure all students have equitable opportunities. As leaders, we must be bold and address this head-on. With that said, we will be including equity training, inclusion, and implicit bias training for all adults in the system over the next few years. We believe we can develop a culture in our schools that is culturally responsive and addresses the needs of our diverse student body. And through an aligned, long-term systemic approach, we will eliminate the disproportionate suspensions and continue to see all students advance in their academic achievement. The Cabinet team has worked hard over the past several months to whittle down our work into manageable bite-sized pieces for this presentation. Of course, we will continue to do our day-to-day work that guides the system, but the priorities you will hear about tonight are the big picture, system aspects of the work that we want to extend over the next few years. We will continue to engage our students, parents, community partners, and school staff to support all the students to leave McCaskey with a path to success. So now, let me tell you the story of our students and staff. And again, you have these slides in front of you if you want to move forward with me. So the first slide really refers to our vision and mission. If you recall, especially those members who attended the Comprehensive Strategic Plan, vision and mission was all about ensuring every single student is academically and emotionally prepared to be successful. And so that means we need to ensure every student receives an excellent education. On the next slide, you will see the board's district goals and strategic priorities that we continue to believe are guiding our work in the long term. On the next page are our shared values. Again, this was done through a variety of stakeholders, about 100 stakeholders who attended various meetings to develop that comprehensive strategic plan for the district, and these were the shared values that they came up with. We believe that our community should educate students, ensuring that students receive their fullest social, emotional, and academic potential. I don't want to read all of these to you, but I believe that we are all in agreement that these are all very, very important values that we share. And now, the next slide is sort of the data of our kids. So this is the story of our kids. The predominant subgroup right now is our Hispanics with 61%. 87% of our children are children of color, and most live in poverty. We have children who have encountered some trauma in their life. We have children who come to us with beautiful ability to speak a foreign language. And we have almost 20% of our kids who are involved in learning English. Our refugee population has actually gone down because of the political picture out there, but we are still really proud of the work that we do with our refugee students. In academics, we all know that poverty plays some part in how students come ready for school. But we also know that our staff have the capacity to help bridge those gaps, and that our students are smart enough to be accelerators so that they can meet the achievement scores that will help them to be successful later on in life. As you can see from our academic data, we pretty much have been flat in English language arts, math, and science. I believe that if we want to be a high-performing school district, we need to do better. We need to do things differently. If you look at our subgroups continue to perform below the expectations. Our English learners and students with disabilities are performing significantly lower than all of our other subgroups. This is an area of concern for us. So the good news is that our attendance has improved. Not enough, and you know that we have been working on this chronically absent initiative since before the start of the school year. We started this in the summer. So right now, 22% of our students are absent for 10% or more of school days. That's too many, and we have improved. We went from 25%, almost 26%, down to 22%. So we're seeing that the work that we're doing is making a difference. We need to do more, and we are aware of that. And we have some great people in place doing that. In terms of our suspensions, as you can see, beginning in 2015-16, our trend started to go down significantly. Right now, we are about 32% down in our suspensions, starting in the year, let me look at that, 2013 to 2014. So we're really pleased with how that's going. Please note that the last bar is only year to date, so that would be, I believe, March 31st. That we put together that data. It has been a lot of work for our schools to get this done. There's been a lot of training for our staff, and we appreciate that commitment. However, we still know that there's still a large number of subgroup students, particularly our black males, who are being suspended disproportionately. And so we know we have to do better, continue to refine our systems, and put additional supports in place so that our staff have more tools in their toolkits. Our graduation rates have also been inconsistent, with an 8.3 decline from the year 2017-18. The good news is that we know that we are reaching more and more of our students. You can see from your slides that more and more of our students are passing the NOCTI test. That is a really important test for the CTE students. Our kids are leaving with a certificate, a state-recognized certificate that says they can do this, whether it's in building trades or being a health assistant or being working in business and accounting. The other good news, and you know we've been pushing dual enrollment Our dual enrollment numbers have swung significantly because we're telling kids about that opportunity, and we're telling their parents, and their parents appreciate the fact that we're paying for their kids to get college credit while they're in high school. And so that has made a huge difference, and more of our kids are seeing that and developing a sense of confidence, because if you can do college-level work in high school, you can do college. So we're really pleased with that, and we'll continue to make that a priority. If you look at our staff is predominantly female, 78%, predominantly white, 75%, and we believe that our staff is very important to us. Our internal promotions, 1 in 5 positions are filled by promotions within our district. So we know that we are building capacity and that our own people are filling those promotions. And that's really important to us because that tells them that we value them, that we want to continue to build everyone's capacity, and that we want to retain them. However, we also know that teachers are asking for more and more support in terms of tools in their tool belt. We will continue to seek out employees who reflect the diversity of our students. We believe that that's important. However, we also want the highest quality of staff, and that's the number one. Our work, when we get to our equity work a little bit later, is that we hope to be able to provide our staff with professional development that will help them to become more culturally responsive to our students. Students have asked for that, and we believe that together with our staff, we can make that happen. Finally, if you look at that graph in front of you, you will see that the majority of our staff, almost 60%, have been in the district less than 10 years. That's a lot of people who've been in the district less than 10 years. And it talks to the importance of us developing capacities, because we want our people to stay, to learn, to become masters of their craft. And if they're leaving us, we're constantly spending lots and lots of money developing new staff. So retention of staff is really important, and it is part of our budget priorities this year. So all of this data really just paints a portrait for you of SDoL students and staff, and all of these areas that I mentioned will be addressed within the budget presentation. And now Mr. Priswara will go on to the next component.
Thank you. So before I jump into the next section, any questions anybody has? Harvey?
Yeah, I had a question about the NOCTI scores, Dr. Rao. It's my understanding we have 150 students in CTE, and only 100, I think it was 101, took the NOCTI test. What happened to the other students?
Well, so NOCTI happens in senior year. We have students in the CTE program in junior year as well. So all students do not take the NOCTI. They take it in senior year.
Okay.
Looking at the academic data, do we examine that in terms of similar school districts in the state? Districts that have demographics like ours, et cetera, et cetera? Because I feel like when we're presented with, we're behind,
Yes,
really
so
like to know.
we do look at that data. We compare ourselves to Harrisburg, Reading, and we are similar to them. But that's not good enough, right? So we don't want to be the best of the bottom. So while we are in line with our peers, we want to do better. We think we can do better. We think we have a much stronger system, district, and great people here who can help raise those achievement scores. Thank you.
A couple of questions. So on slide number 5, the demographic data, are there, other than the refugee students, which is hard to predict, given one can't predict political climate federally, are there any significant demographic changes in the foreseeable future that will alter this? Like, for example, an increase in English language learners that we would need to think about budget planning wise, or do we see these numbers as having been consistent over the last 5 years and then probably maintaining over the next 5 to 10?
So, in response to your question, it's kind of hard to project if those types of demographics would change. But to go back to the second part of your question, we've been pretty much anywhere from 16 to 18%. This one's as high as 19%. So it's slowly climbing for English learners. So I would expect that that trend is probably going to keep ticking up at a slow rate. I don't think we would get a significant, 3 or 4 percentage points increase, but I think we can expect that that'll climb slowly around here, depending on whether refugees are coming or just depending on our general demographic around here. So I guess the last part of your question was, yes, should we plan for that? We should, but it's going to be hard to really predict that in 5 years. But we could go backwards and look and smooth the trend out to kind of see if the growth trend is a moderate progression over time. So we could definitely take a look at that and see if that would be our expectations, and then we could actually go back and say, and what did we do during those years to help support English learners?
Because I know last year we had a growth in the need for ESL given us taking on so many students from Puerto Rico. So that's hard to predict. But I think if we look at the last 5 years in terms of demographics and try to project out what the next 5 years for demographics are going to be for our students, that might help with budget planning.
Absolutely.
And then slide number 11, 1 in every 5 hires is promoted from within the district. Could we get that, and you probably, this is me, a request for information, get that broken down by management level positions? So, oh,
I have
great.
that. I'm sorry, I have
Yeah.
that
Actually
for
have
you.
that.
Oh,
If you'd
it's
like it
later.
now.
Great.
It's
Yeah.
in our notes.
Great. I just think that there's probably a difference between are we promoting managers versus other new hires. But I can wait if it's coming. And then slide 13, I think that would be good to compare to other districts. Like, I don't know, in looking at this and thinking about where our budgetary priorities need to be in terms of spending for staff, it's difficult for me to tell, are we above the average here, and so maybe we don't need to be investing here? Or are we below the average here, and this is a place we need to be investing? So comparing to other districts would help us interpret 13 a little better.
Mrs. Turns, you want to talk to the internal promotions and where they came from? Do you have that, or?
I don't have to have it on my laptop, but I can speak a little bit to our turnover here. Is that I think that regardless of how we compare to school districts, which I'm going to imagine that based on past experience, we're probably incredibly high relative to our neighboring school districts. The more turnover we have, the less masters we have, which means that the quality that we're able to provide to our students is lessened. And it also, our district is implementing the strategies that we will get into further on the presentation, which takes time to be able to, again, the keyword master. And so we definitely want to see a change in those numbers to more even out.
So in terms of those promotions, so we had 4 support staff who became teachers. We have 5 administrators, 8 teachers, and 1 support staff member who went into administration. And then I have 30 support went into support. So I suppose that's from one level of support staff to the next level of support staff. So it was a total of 48 promotions. And that's just this year, by the way, since July 2018.
Any other questions on that part? So we can come back to that if someone has a question that comes through. So the next part, so back in the fall, and even in the prior years, you've seen these icons. We're now on slide 14. So what we had preliminarily identified as our budget priorities and how they impact student outcomes. And what we found, so I believe back in January or even in December, I'll look to Dave Perry on this, who said, how do we look long-term? How can we make different adjustments now that can as we were talking about the Act 1 tax index. So it really made us look a little bit more strategically and as Dr. Rao mentioned, basically over 3 months, we've been trying to fine tune all this. So what we did is we had this out in front of you in the fall and to the public and said, hey, we believe these are our priorities for budgetary purposes. But what we said is, you know what, there's so many priorities in any one given year, and every school probably has priorities. So how do we refine them and how do we really focus them? And then look at the priorities. And what the team came up with is how do we take these priorities and each team member will talk about how they build off one another and how they all connect. So what we did is we took those 7 priorities and we came up with 4 focus priorities. So these are not to take place of the strategic priorities, as Dr. Rao mentioned earlier. These are really about how we align our financial resources, and all of these, when you look kind of back up the scale, if you will, they all do tie back to the strategic priorities in one way or another. Some tie to them in multiple ways. But what we believe is this is a nice, clear, concise way to take those systems and really apply investments that we'll talk about throughout this and how they all align to each other and how we can apply resources to that over time and make long-term strategic decisions. Ultimately, we have limited resources, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But without putting any spoiler on this, you can see they're very clear. There's 4. There's teaching and learning, student-centered culture and climate. There's our communications, and then what we call our operational effectiveness. So I'm going to turn it over now to Dr. Powell, and Dr. Powell is going to talk to us about the first one that we have up on the slide, which is teaching and learning. So Dr. Powell, just remind you to make sure you use the microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So as we talk about teaching and learning, one of the things that we want to just be mindful of is the overarching principles that we're using with respect to what's happening in OTL. We know that we need to collectively shape the vision for continuous improvement, and that's with our leaders as well as our staff, continue to build leadership capacity, and provide professional learning at all levels. Those are those overarching principles that you'll see as we move through this document. As a condition for learning, let me orient you to the slides. Each presenter will follow the same path that I'm taking you on. We will talk about our needs, we'll move into strategies, etc. So what is the need? In a nutshell, the need in the School District of Lancaster is that we become a high-performing district. The strategy slide shows you, I call it the quick list or the reference of strategies, but we will move into charts to show you specifically what our strategies are. In the Office of Teaching and Learning, as you know, many of these things you've heard already. It's writing curricula, improving instruction, and we have various strategies under that umbrella, creating a culture of literacy across the district, as well as reimagining how we do professional development. We've made strides there, and enhancing our college and career readiness for all of our students. What will the district do? These are our strategy slides. Let me orient you. In the left-hand column, the information, the strategy that you see in the blue box, those are all the strategies that I showed you in a list on the previous slide. Now, these are set up to show you short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and you'll see that short-term is 1 year, mid-term 2 to 3 years, long-term 4 to 5 years. We are essentially going to talk about the strategy, mention what we're doing in the short term, but really focus on where do we want to be in 4 to 5 years. So we're not going to get into the minutia of this work, but we are going to show you overarching where do we want to end up with respect to the work that we're doing. On this slide, let's look at that strategy, aligning curriculum assessments and instruction to the PA standards. This is our curriculum writing work, and ultimately, in 4 to 5 years, we want to adopt a curriculum review cycle that we know that each of our areas, regardless of grade level, whether it's a core subject, whether it's unified arts, that we know with a curriculum review cycle, we know that we've taken a look at those curricula and then adjusted them accordingly to make sure that our teachers have the tools they need in the classroom to be successful. Improving classroom instruction is our next strategy. Now, we've already started some of this work, as you'll see when we talk about year one in the short term, but our work with respect to understanding the Marzano framework and doing training for leaders, and teachers and working on calibrating what we know in terms of instruction. The whole purpose is that we work towards a collective understanding about what is good instruction. And so our long-term goal is in 4 to 5 years, instructional rounds will just be something that we do in this district. It'll be part of our way of being. And when I say instructional rounds, it's similar to what we see when we see medical rounds, that you see a group of people that move through classrooms and they are calibrating and they are talking about instruction and then giving feedback to teachers to help them with respect to improving their craft. Again, ultimately, it's working on what are we doing in classrooms and what are those student outcomes. That's what this work is about. I'll go to the middle box in terms of integrating technology. Our whole purpose of integrating technology is not just so students have electronic tools. The goal is to build and develop critical thinkers. They're empowered and they're doing and using technology in academic ways. We know that students use technology in many ways, but the goal is to work with them and let us work with students, and actually students working with us, to say, here's what these tools can do, and here's the power of using these tools to design, to create, to collaborate. And so our goal is that we will see that in our classrooms. And then the last row there that talks about providing frequent and timely feedback. We know that the path to good instruction is planning, it's preparation, but it also includes feedback. And we want to build that in the district so that that's, again, a way of being. We know that we talk about instruction, we give feedback in instruction, and we work to improve that to get a deeper sense of what is good instruction and how do we get there. I'm going to move to the next slide. That's slide 21. And you'll see as a strategy, improve middle level teaching, learning, and design. We've been talking about our middle schools, and now it's sort of the perfect storm of things coming together. We've been involved in the CSI process, the Comprehensive Support and Improvement process at our middle schools. That involves an assessment and then an action plan. And so our long-term goal with respect to the CSI process is we will implement those action plans, looking at best practices, and again, the goal is to increase our student outcomes. You're familiar with the middle years program. In 4 to 5 years, actually by 2021, our goal is to get authorized with MYP through our middle schools. So you know we do MYP in grades 9 and 10, but we are doing the work to then bring on MYP in grades 6, 7, and 8 and meeting the requirements for that process. We've talked about the importance of building equity across the district, that all students have access to rigorous curricula and strong instruction, and MYP is our path as we move in that direction. Building a culture of literacy cannot be understated. Our goal in the district is that our students across the district, that they know, understand, and are reading at grade level and above, because we know that it's important to teach students to read by 3rd grade, so then in 3rd grade and older that they can then read to learn. So it's been said before, it is not original, reading is fundamental, and we recognize the importance of our students being able to read. In addition to talking about independent reading, you've heard us talk about ARC. I do want to mention that with our curriculum writing, part of our work is also to look at literacy across the continuum, to look at literacy K through 12. So it's building that foundation, but recognizing that every classroom, every student, every subject, every opportunity, our students should be reading. Our next strategy, identifying professional learning needs through the analysis of a variety of data. You've seen that work start. We started that work last year. It's part of the board's goal in terms of looking at professional development for everyone in our system, recognizing that that is a key to, it's a key to help our leaders, our teachers, our support staff. It's a key for our improvement in the system, and we are committed to working with respect to our professional development. The Office of Teaching and Learning will partner, and you'll hear this a little later as well, we'll partner with the Office of Talent, we'll partner with the Student Services Department, because we recognize the importance of professional development. Okay, everybody take a deep breath. We're moving on to slide 23. So here's the good news. The good news is that we'll be talking about systems as we go through this presentation. And you're going to hear some, I'm going to say, not redundancy, but you're going to hear some of the same language. And that language is helping us fine-tune the work that we do. So the first strategy here, identify and address individual student learning needs. And we've talked about a multi-tiered system of support. You've heard us talk about it in terms of student services, but the multi-tiered system of support, which we often call MTSS, it actually has a behavioral and an academic component, right? And so our goal is that we start speaking that same language across the district. We talk about tier 1, meaning what's universal in the district? What is the instruction that all students get? With tier 1, we will spend some time, we will, with our curriculum work, with our focus on instruction, we will be real clear in terms of defining what tier 1 looks like. But ultimately, as we move through years 4 to 5, we want to build a continuous assessment of student data, of outcomes and professional development to help us do the work that we do to improve instructional effectiveness. When we talk about a multi-tiered system of support, the system is based on data. How do we use data to determine our next steps? And so you'll continue to hear that language through this presentation, but throughout our work as we move forward in the Office of Teaching and Learning. Lastly, enhancing college and career readiness. That's part of our work. You'll see us as we move forward as the Department of Pennsylvania, Department of Ed for PA changes or amends some of the artifacts and the work that our students should have with respect to career education and work standards. You will see us make sure that we make those adjustments appropriately so that our students have the artifacts and the skills necessary to prepare them for college, career, work, and life. So now I'm going to take you to this slide. It basically says, what outcomes do we expect? Again, you will see this throughout the presentation. Here are our outcomes. We want to improve student outcomes for academic growth and academic achievement. We want to improve instructional practice across the district, again, so that it's consistent. It shouldn't matter where you go to school in this district. Our instruction should be consistent across the board, offering rigorous instruction and support for our students to be successful, as well as across the board, we are working on building that culture of literacy, which I mentioned, because we want our students reading on grade level and above. I mentioned the strategy of enhancing college and career readiness. And lastly, professional development. We want a system that is responsive to the needs and interests of staff. And when I say staff, I'm talking about administrators, central office, teachers, support staff. I'm talking across the board that we need a system that is supportive of those needs and flexible enough that we take into consideration what the needs of the system are. That concludes the Office of Teaching and Learning, the strategies that I wanted to review. Are there any questions? Oh, sorry.
My question is, I know we're doing a lot of work around middle schools. I'm not really clear on what the state has said about middle schools. I think that they're under some sort of improvement plan. And I know people have been in to talk about what that looks like. I don't know enough about that to, speak intelligently to it. But does that factor into that? Like, I don't feel like I'm seeing that, or else maybe it's called something that I don't know what it is.
So that would be back on slide, back on slide 21. Across the first row where it says the strategies improve middle school level teaching, learning, and design, and then it speaks to in year 1, we're doing the comprehensive support and improvement assessment. That's that CSI process. okay? And so here's the good news. The good news is that Dr. Rao said last year, or maybe the year before even that, to say, what's happening at our middle schools? What's happening with respect to our student outcomes, and what are we doing about it? So we had started looking at middle schools. Dr. Keene and Dr. Butterfield had started working on the scheduling challenges that we have at middle school, and it's been a process. So the good news is we started doing some of this work to say, what's going on? What do we see? Let's look at those data. Student Services was looking at suspensions and discipline, and then the state said, by the way, we think that there are some systems and practices that you want to take a harder look at in order to improve. And so it's been, I call it like a perfect storm that these things have come together. So the good news is that each of our middle schools has been involved in a process to assess practices, perceptions that required doing surveys and, required large stakeholder groups, including teachers, community folks, parents, and they did an assessment using surveys of students, parents, teachers, and so they're taking all of those data and looking at some, I'm going to call them essential practices, to see where do we align, where are we a little off, and where do we think we need to really focus, not focus on everything, which is great, where do we need to narrow our focus in order to build an action plan about what we want to do and what we want to see in terms of outcomes for students in our middle schools. So you see in that same row, again, we started doing some of this work before that process, but you see Hand Middle School is listed there as a demonstration school for rigor. We were very clear in our understanding that we needed to look more specifically at instruction and look more specifically at professional development for teachers and leaders. And that also falls in that same category of how are we going to improve middle schools? What's happening in middle schools, and how do we address that?
And I would add to that one of the essential practices that Dr. Powell just mentioned is, do you have an aligned curriculum? And so that's the work that OTL is already doing, so that the schools would not select that because we're already providing that. So what they're doing is they're looking about, I think it was 26 essential practices, and the areas of focus come through based on all of the surveys that are done. So Dr. Keene and Dr. Butterfield have been very, very involved, attending all of those meetings. They are very familiar with the process that's going on at the middle schools. Did you want them to talk a little bit about that, maybe?
I guess I just knew that was going on, but I was wondering how is it a partnership? I mean, in the olden days, it used to be very much a punishment from the state. The state was very much like, fix this or else, but I mean, I don't know, is it still that way?
No, it's definitely taken on a different feel.
Oh.
Oops, sorry.
I will share my microphone.
Thank you. So it's definitely taken on a different feel. With each of the designations, the state has allocated resources and individuals. And our two folks are Marty Hudax, who used to be the superintendent in Solanco, and he's working with two of the middle schools, and then Ed Gooch, who formerly worked for us. And they're coming in and facilitated that process that Dr. Powell kind of described there, where they're providing resources, insight. They lead the focus groups from both surveys as well as kind of face-to-face interviews to gather all of that data, put it all together, and then lead them through this kind of decision-making exercise to determine which of those essential practices they're going to focus on over the next 3 years. So it's been very, very collaborative in the time, and actually we're creeping up on the point of completing the plans because ultimately they will need to be approved by you all in a June board meeting. So we'll be presenting them as well as discussing them. Each of the middle school principals will be here with us.
And we do have a June presentation for the board where those schools will share those plans and the process, and that would be the first committee of the whole in June.
Did you have anything to add, Dr. Butterfield?
Just that unlike the processes in the past where maybe a couple people got together in a room and wrote the school improvement plan and then shared it with a larger committee and they said, okay, fine, thank you. This is a real collaborative process with the state, but also with the stakeholders at this school. We mentioned all these different groups that have worked. It's been no less than 10 meetings per school over the last 3 to 4 months, and there will be many more conversations and dialogues, and we've analyzed and found the root cause of what we believe are the most significant problems at the school that can be addressed through the improvement process. And now they're putting together the strategies that match those, and making sure that they have SMART goals that go with all those strategies that are timely, effective, that will result in a change in the way they perform.
And I would add that Karen Nguyen is the constant amongst the 4 schools, because Josh has 2, Jay has 2, so Ms. Nguyen goes to every meeting. When they're, especially if they're not around, we know that Ms. Nguyen will be there. And also that I've met with the state members myself to ensure that the work they do is going to enhance our work. We don't want our staff to feel like, oh, here's this other thing that the state is throwing on top of us. So we've been really clear, and through, my staff here, we're really engaged in the process. It's not like the state is telling us, this is what you have to do. And I think that's really good and different than what I've heard from the past.
Could I ask a question related to that? How long does this process go on? Is there a yearly review by the state next year and then next year, or is it a 3-year process?
Yeah, sure. Overall, it's a 3-year process, but built within the plans are quarterly benchmarks, and the individuals that have been assigned to us as school improvement facilitators that I mentioned, Marty and Ed, will be along with us to discuss how well we're doing in meeting those benchmarks. But we're also recognizing even some of the things that we've selected will be short-term, and then we're going to be moving on to kind of next steps. And so it's not one plan for 3 years. It's going to be a constant and living plan that we will continue to reevaluate based on the goals, the SMART goals that we've set, and the quarterly benchmarks and how we're achieving them. So it's definitely more dynamic than here's your plan, see it through for a year or two. It's a 3-year process, but it's a living 3-year process that we'll be constantly adjusting as we move through it with good hard benchmarks that we're working towards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So just one more quick thing about that, and I think that you just spoke to this, but let me just ask again. It sounds like it's comprehensive and everybody's working together, and that's all great, but we're already doing like a lot of work with the demonstration school, and we're already doing a lot of work with MYP. So what does it look like to a teacher in a classroom when you say, okay, now here are these new goals and new benchmarks that you have to, and these new strategies that are coming down from PDE that you have to do, when they're already doing this other giant body of work?
So that's a great question, and fortunately the process allows for us to use the good strategies that we already have in place and dovetail them into the CSI process. And so they've looked at these pieces that are working, and they're talking about how do they enhance them, how do they enrich them, as opposed to having this whole set and that whole set.
Almost, the word that comes to mind is it's provided us focus. And I would almost unequivocally say each of the middle schools in some iteration has chosen MTSS, enhancing their MTSS process as one of the high leverage strategies that they're going to focus on over the next 3 years. Well, I mean, you all have heard MTSS multiple times over the last several years, and it's a lot of the work that we're already doing. And so they've identified it as one of those areas that they know they're going to get the most impact if they invest the time and the focus in it. And so it really has, Dr. Rao mentioned the essential practices. The schools are selecting one or two, or selecting 2, and that's their focus. They're not going to do 18 things, and there are many of the things that we're already doing, but it comes back to providing them some focus on what they can work on and get really good at before moving on to the next thing. And that's absolutely been the pleasant byproduct of this. It's more, I don't want to call it restrictive, but it's really pushed us to focus on a few things and do them very well, and things that we're already doing.
That sounds good. And it seems to me it's like instead of sprinkling it on and some people missing some stuff, you're going to kind of just take a couple things and drench people with it. And I think of that as training, like making sure everybody is on board and involved and knows all of our staff understand MTSS and are doing it. And people aren't waiting for that training for like next year or something like that.
One of the quarterly benchmarks comes to mind in one of the schools that I'm working with, and it says 100% of all staff will. And, you know, it's the assurance that we can prove that every staff member at that school recognizes and understands the process of MTSS and their place within it. And we can't always say that for certainty now, but it's absolutely one of the things that we'll be measuring and we'll be able to prove through this process that we've done our due diligence around that. Yeah, yes.
Are there any other questions with respect to the work in OTL? If there are no other questions, we will move on to student-centered culture and climate, and Mr. Lopez will talk to us about the good work that's happening in student services.
All right, good evening all. The Office of Student Services is excited to take a deeper dive in our work around social emotional learning, and as you've heard Dr. Powell and the team speak about, continued work around a multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS. Just a reminder to all regarding Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that in order for our students to meet self-actualization and allowing them to reach their full potential, we must provide for their basic needs, whether that's food, shelter, clothing, safety and security, relationships, and giving our students a sense of accomplishment so that we can help them meet and reach their full potential. So what is the need? We want to foster an environment that is safe and encouraging for all students, promote and sustain a positive school environment that engages students in their learning, and again, implement a multi-tiered system of support across all areas, inclusive of academics, behavior, attendance, and just a way that the school district of Lancaster does business. And as Dr. Powell alluded to, and as you will continue to hear from us, when we speak in MTSS, we're looking at universal Tier 1, what do all of our students need and receive? Tier 2, which would be targeted interventions and support. Again, what small groups, what supports do our smaller groups of students needs? And then finally, intensive support, which would be our Tier 3. How are we individualizing supports to meet the individual needs of our students? So what are the strategies? Our goal is to promote social responsibility and academic achievement for all students. How will we do this? We will continue to use data to drive decision-making. We will continue to identify and support best practices across the district. And finally, we will be working toward creating systems to support teaching and learning, and again, creating systems that support the whole child, including academics, social, emotional, attendance, discipline, behavior, so on and so forth. What will the district do? There's 5 things identified here, but a lot of them are already being implemented to some degree. Our goal over the long term is to have full implementation of these things, but we'll start with providing equity and implicit bias training for all staff, continue implementation of PBIS at all schools, continue restorative practice training and implementation, provide crisis prevention intervention, also known as CPI, with a specific focus on de-escalation techniques for all staff, and then finally explore and implement a social emotional learning Tier 1 curriculum across the school district of Lancaster. So just to break out our strategy a little bit deeper, our long-term goal, again, is that all schools meet fidelity requirements as identified for PDE with respect to PBIS. Most recently, you all recognized 9 schools here in the school district of Lancaster for meeting Tier 1 and Tier 2 fidelity. We want to continue that work and differentiate our support so that those schools continue to receive the necessary supports to continue meeting fidelity requirements identified through PDE, but also onboard the remaining schools that have not began implementation of PBIS, again, with the long-term goal that all of the schools across the school district of Lancaster are implementing PBIS with fidelity and also meeting those fidelity benchmarks that are identified through PDE. The next two are restorative practices and CPI. These two were strategies that we felt necessary to implement. We were hearing from principals, teachers, as well as the Teachers Association that they felt teachers needed additional resources and supports in their classrooms to deal with some of the challenges that are present in our classrooms. So we wanted to invest in further development and training for our staff and looking at restorative practices training. Again, I'm going to start with the long-term goal. Our long-term goal is that all staff in the school district of Lancaster, whether you're a cafeteria worker, a school bus driver, a building principal, teacher, a community-based partner, an SRO, we want all of those folks that are interacting with our students to know and understand restorative practices, and that's our goal. That is going to be the way that we do business here in the school district of Lancaster. So some of the short-term will be to continue to train and build leadership and leadership capacity across the district, and we want to build on some of those great things that are happening in our schools already. Two schools in particular that are seeing successes with respect to restorative are Reynolds and Price. We want to look at those as models for best practices with respect to restorative, and then we want to invest more deeply in our teachers and build teacher leadership so that we have capacity within. We don't have to outsource and look toward external professional development, but we have the capacity internally to continue to train and develop our teachers, our building leaders, and this just becomes a cycle of how we do business and how we train all staff with respect to restorative. And I think the long-term picture for this would be the city of Lancaster becomes a restorative community where everything that we do is done through the spirit of restorative. We want to pioneer that here in the school district of Lancaster with the hopes that that filters out into the bigger community as well. Crisis prevention intervention with a focus on de-escalation techniques. Again, this was an ask of teachers, and in particular our Teachers Association. And the long term, again, same thing. We want all staff to be trained in CPI de-escalation techniques. We want this to become part of the onboarding and orientation process that all of our new teachers get. With that being said, we also know that we have many other teachers that have not received the CPI training thus far. So we will be using data to differentiate, to provide, using discipline data to differentiate training so that we are providing the neediest groups or neediest schools based on data, some of those initial trainings. And again, the investment will be in the train-the-trainer model where we are building capacity again internally so that we have enough trainers so that we can spread the wealth across all of our 12 elementaries, 4 middles, 1 K-8, the campus, so on and so forth. We want to capitalize on the work that's already happening at our middle schools, and just with respect to PBIS and restorative and CPI, all of these fall under the lens of social emotional learning. So again, we want to capitalize on what's happening at the middle schools during the advisory period. So we'll be engaging in conversation with building leaders, the directors, to kind of identify best practices that are already being implemented at the middle school level so that we can build on those. We want to, the long-term goal would be to implement a district-wide curriculum that, again, supports social emotional learning, where there's time carved out on a regular basis so that we are explicitly teaching our students the social behaviors that we want to see that promote social responsibility. How we will do that over the short and long term, again, capitalizing on what's already happening, but then organizing a curriculum team to include the Office of Teaching and Learning, counselors, teachers, building leaders, to begin to explore and research curriculums and decide the type of curriculum that we want to implement, do a needs assessment, student needs, teacher needs, again, to help identify the best curriculum to utilize. And then once that's established, we will begin onboarding of the program, and then providing ongoing support and professional development for staff. Finally, we want to ensure that students have access to equitable opportunities. We will do this long-term, will be to provide ongoing equity, inclusion, and implicit bias training for all staff. Last month, an RFP went out to identify a potential agency to support in this work. And the next steps would be to identify a committee once we select the agency that's going to support in the work, to identify some of those mid and long-term goals so that we are providing professional development and training over the long term. What outcomes do we expect? And not one of these outcomes is specifically attached to a particular strategy. So our goal is to, again, the overarching goal is to teach social responsibility and increase academic achievement for all students. But some of the outcomes we're looking for in particular are students feel safer at our schools, students' social and emotional development continues to increase, parents have an increased confidence in the school district of Lancaster. We would like to see an increased positive staff perception, inclusive of decreases in chronic absenteeism, decreases in office discipline referrals, suspensions, disproportionality, and we will start to see increases in academic achievement. And then with respect to equity training, we want to have a deepened cultural competence of our staff, and we want to implement district practices that are also culturally responsive. Are there any questions? Yes.
I see a lot when we talk about equity, a lot of cultural, and I see nothing about sexual and gender identity-based harassment, if not violence. And I'm really concerned that in our key push for equity, that our LGBTQIA students are going to be inequitably like, and
So once we determine which organization we're going to work with, that will be part of the discussion, like how do we include all of our subgroups? We started with cultural responsiveness because that's where the equity design team started. If you remember, we started working on the issue of our African-American males, but actually in both of the proposals, they do include the LGBTQ+ community and others. So that will definitely be part of the work. Yeah.
because I'm also, I mean, I've voiced this before, I'm also worried about sexual harassment in general, because we apparently have no real reports of it, from what I remember from one meeting, and that tells me that a lot is overlooked, and so as we're trying to increase suspensions, and what I don't want to happen is that sexual harassment of any kind or gender identity-based harassment is just sort of not on the radar.
It will be on the radar. It
And then there was Commissioner attended, we had an LGBTQIA sexual assault training at FEM, and he was there, and it was fantastic, and I was really glad he was there. But, yeah.
And just to piggyback on that, when we look at social emotional learning and a social emotional learning curriculum, all of that work is embedded within the social emotional curriculum where we're talking about acceptance and we're teaching kids social skills, teaching them social responsibility. So that also comes out of the work with regard to a social emotional curriculum and then specific training around equity, cultural responsiveness, cultural awareness, and things of that sort. Mm-hmm. Agreed. 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 Mhm.
Candace, if I can respond too to that, the equity design team met yesterday afternoon. And we were able to review the responses from, in terms of the equity training and from the two proposals, and it clearly included gender identity and behaviors as well as race, ethnicity. Go through that. It was specifically mentioned in each of those from the two groups that are being considered as to whether they would do the training. So it's an inclusive part of it.
And I would add, so whatever organization is selected, and there will be a process. The first part of the process was internal, then I brought it to the equity design team. The next part is going to be bringing to another committee. Eventually, it will come for you guys. But the point is that any organization that you contract with, you tell them what you want. You're not just accepting their proposal as is. So, we're going to be partners, and we're going to say, this is what we want, make sure this is in there, and this is how we're going to measure it. So I just want to reassure you that that is on our radar.
Any other questions? All right. Matt P. with Community Engagement.
Bear with me as I'm substituting this evening. on this section. How's everybody feeling? It's been a little over an hour. Anybody need a quick?
You've got 3 pages, you want to do your piece, and then you tell us where the
You-
natural stopping is.
Let me do this one really quick because this is not my bag. So we'll move right through this one relatively quickly, but we don't want to glance over it too much. So community engagement. So again, following the same format. So what are the need? We want to elevate our brand. We've been working on this for quite some time in terms of parent and guardian engagement. What does that look like, and how do we get our parents and our guardians more engaged with the School District of Lancaster? Part of our strategic priorities is aligning all those community resources, and there are a whole host of them outside of this room. So you're all involved in various ones. You've seen us engage with different community organizations, but how do we align that to help support and build on the programming that we're doing in the school district? So, and then lastly, tracking meaningful and actionable communications data. So what is our data telling us in terms of communication? And you know, as part of one of our priorities this year, just priorities in general, was enhancing our communications department, and we're embarking on that. And these different needs definitely align to all those different things. So the strategies, I'll just sum them up really. They're really 3 words: brand, communicate, and advocate. So without reading all those different things, again, branding, communicating, and advocating. And then how do we align those 3 strategies to what we want to accomplish here? So in terms of what we're going to do, I'll try to follow the same path others did with looking at the long term. So what's out there right now, and again, as part of that district improvement plan work through that committee, we created a portrait of a graduate. Many of you were involved in that. Some others out here in the audience were involved in that. But how do we leverage that work? How do we use that as a way to enhance our brand as the School District of Lancaster, and what do we do with that? So there's definitely an opportunity to sort of brand us out there, not only to the community and to others that maybe want to come to the community. How do we leverage that to work with our business partners, so on and so forth. Also looking at how do we take different types of platforms and enhance our communications. Again, looking at our brand, who we are. We're not selling a product, but in essence we are. We're selling ourselves to what we are. So a couple of the board members yesterday, you were talking about how you were advocating up at Harrisburg. So that's part of our brand, who we are. How do you use that to go up and tell our story, to get the resources that we need? And that's all part of our communication strategy. And then ultimately, under building a positive brand, is how do we align the different things, our different architecture, and our different programs, such as IB, our AP, all those different course offerings. You've talked a lot over the last couple months over how do we look at expanding our CTE program. And then cyber program, a lot of that discussion was happening as we were coming into the room. So looking at all those different things, what do we offer? How do we brand ourselves to make this a destination, as I say? School District of Lancaster is a destination for not only for parents, for community members, but for our students. Why, based on our brand, why should they come here? Why should we invest in these programs, and why should we invest in those students? So that's all part of our branding. The next one being looking at our audiences, our parents, involving more parent and guardian engagement. How do we do that? So again, looking at all those digital platforms we might have. There's a lot of good stuff happening at schools. If you have students now, you're hearing a lot about Class Dojo. We have our Schoology platform, which is a learning management platform. Almost I think every student's on that now. And then ultimately we have a new student information systems, which we're going to talk about in the operational effectiveness section. But how do we align all those different platforms and put them together so that we can engage our parents? And that not only digitally, but in what way is appropriate. And I know it's been a long journey. I've been here for a dozen years, and we're still trying to look for the magic bullet on how do we engage our community, our parents and our guardians. So again, just expanding all that as part of our communication strategies. Oh, sorry, I went too far. And then lastly, under that advocating, is ultimately looking at that long term. We want to be the model. Although if you ask me outside, I would tell you that we're already that model. But I think there's a lot more that we can do, and the team really believes there's a lot more we can do. So how do we use all those different things we just talked about to really position ourselves as a model in urban education? So we talk here about the superintendent being a thought leader. How do we leverage our superintendent as the only female Latino, correct, in the state of Pennsylvania, superintendent? So I think kudos to you. There's a lot of opportunity not only for our superintendent, but just, again, using us as a model to advocate in Harrisburg. Again, kudos to the board members for doing that, And all of us should be doing that, because as we get to the end, you're going to see why it's important that we need to be out advocating for different types of resources, whether it's financial resources, community resources, so on and so forth. But really, using all those different resources that we currently have and building a long-term strategy that, again, not only are we a destination, but we're also a model for urban ed. So I always believe that if you want to learn how to do something, you come to the School District of Lancaster, because we've either experienced it and been doing it for a while, or we're on the cutting edge and doing some things. So lastly, what do we expect to have happen? So looking at our surveys, from F&M, improved indicators of perception, increasing our external web traffic, and we're already starting to see that, and we're working on a new web design currently. And increased positive sentiment is shared by overall impressions. So how are people feeling about us? So measuring that more to see how are people reacting and engaging with the School District of Lancaster. Under our, engaging with parents and guardians, we should start to see more engagement on all our different communications platforms, and that'll be measured by our Office of Communications. And then increasing our parent-guardian engagement. Again, we have various surveys that we do that now, so we definitely have baseline data to work off of. And then ultimately for advocating, increasing our opportunities, increasing participation and leveraging our opportunities with businesses, and looking at different ways that we're accumulating resources through in-kind support or other community agencies. So, did I do that quick enough for you? Because sometimes I'm criticized I don't stay to my time. So that's really for communication. So that one's a little bit shorter, but and I'll open it up for questions, but I'm hoping that the board is starting to see how each of these priorities build on one another, and how all their, and we're going to get to the finances soon, and you'll see how this all ties together. But this is the important work, and this is actually a lot of the work that you've seen through various meetings every month. And we're going to get to how this all impacts us, not only short term, but long term as well. So questions on the community engagement piece, I'll do my best to respond. Would you like to take a, I'll leave that up to you.
How does everybody feel? It looks like, just organizationally, if there's one more section, it's the operational effectiveness section. Does everybody need to use the restroom at this moment, or should we let Matt finish that and then?
Do you want to get through that, and then we'll hit the financial piece?
And then we'll hit and then we'll make the transition to the financial piece. Everybody okay? Or do you need your cake break?
This is your
If I
meeting.
may,
So do it.
President Gallagher.
Yeah.
I was just reading on the advocacy, building this database of existing partnerships and donors. That's great. I think we've needed that, and it hasn't been there, I think, ever.
If I could just tell a short little story, because some of our partners are just amazing. Most of our partners are, but we had an issue where a CTC program sent us this huge bill and said, you guys, your kids aren't paying for their books, their supplies, their uniforms, and, they can't stay unless they pay for those things. We already know. But we put an all call out to our faith-based partners and said, if anybody would like to contribute to a fund for our CTC students, we received thousands of dollars more than we needed. Our partners are so phenomenal. And so now we have started a fund for any student who goes to the CTC who needs to buy additional books or supplies or anything at all. We're going to be able to get that through the fund. I just thought it was a great story.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to give you the go-ahead there, Matt. Yes, I have no indications.
Very good.
Otherwise.
So again, using that same format of how each of these build on each other. So ultimately, after we do teaching and learning, we make sure students have the right culture and climate, and then we're engaging our community. We want to make sure that all the operations are as effective as possible to support students. So in terms of our operational effectiveness, so the need is we want to have a high quality and diverse staff that meets the needs of our students. We want to make sure that we have the technology and facility infrastructure that we need. And then ultimately, and Randy, you always ask me this year after year, what are our system efficiencies? What are we doing to provide efficiencies in our system, not only to save money, but it's really about how are we helping the folks out in the field do their job better. So, and we'll talk about a couple different ways that we're going to look at that. So strategies are we're going to develop a comprehensive talent plan. Stephanie Turns is going to talk more about that in detail. We're going to make sure that we have a sustained long-range facilities plan that meets the 21st century learning environment. We're going to make sure that we continue on with our technology infrastructure. So you heard Dr. Powell talk about how we're going to embed technology in terms of for student learning. What we're really talking about here is the technology infrastructure in order to be able to do all that, that we have the backbone to make sure that happens. And then ultimately, how do we enhance and improve systems to ensure that there's efficiencies, not only just in schools, but in offices as well. So I'll turn it over to Mrs. Turns now to talk about talent.
Our department's main priorities are around attracting, developing, engaging our employees. Our first step in attracting high quality and diverse employees starts with strengthening our current processes by implementing equity-informed best practices. From there, we really want to focus on pathways to grow our support staff, our teachers into administrative positions, and also provide equitable pathways for those who are underrepresented minorities in certain high needs positions. Our next priority is to collaborate with the Office of Teaching and Learning, with Student Services, and our Director of Schools to develop our staff to meet our ever-evolving needs. We want to make sure that our staff are prepared to fill our key vacancies and that we provide pathways that keep them engaged. Lastly, we want to engage and retain our high-performing staff, which means that we want to build upon the I believe it's the biannual staff survey that is conducted by F&M, and then form a pan-organizational committee so that we can implement and develop data-informed strategies to retain our staff.
So now looking under our facility infrastructure, so these are pretty self-explanatory, but school construction and renovation, we want to make sure that ultimately, and it's going to take some time, that all our facilities are up to the requirements that we need them to be. So we still have a number of schools outside of our current phase projects that we need to start to plan for. But ultimately, right now, as part of this budget process and in the midterm and long term, is that we have the financing in place now to complete our phase 3 projects and make sure that we have the latest and greatest within those buildings. School security renovation. So the board made a conscious effort last year after a number of events that have happened in the United States, and they're still ongoing in this world, is to make sure our facilities are safe. So the board last year put $1 million aside for those safety and security needs, and we'll talk about what those are in a little more detail in a couple of slides. But ultimately, long term, we want to make sure that not only do we improve the schools, and when we improve them through the major construction projects, we have all that put in place. But for those schools that we can't get to for maybe another 5, 6, 8, 10 years, let's hope it doesn't go that long, we want to make sure we're taking care of them as well. And that's what that safety and security strategy is there for. In terms of technology infrastructure, we do thank the board again for the technology plan that we approved, I believe, February, March of last year. And we're in year 1 of that. But the long term for technology infrastructure is, again, making sure we fulfill that plan. So it's a 5-year plan. We're in year 1. And by the end, that long term, that we're going to fulfill that plan. So ultimately, every student has access to a one-to-one device. And every staff has been trained, and that's part of Dr. Powell's plan as well. And that we have the backbone and the infrastructure to make sure that we can maintain and sustain that. But ultimately, by the end of year 5, all that would be in place. Our student information systems, the board just, recently, I think we just had some updates on the Contract and Operations Committee. But again, we're implementing a new system now, and that's going to take some time. So this is short term, which is this next year coming up. We're going to have that system rolling out. But ultimately, what we want to have accomplished with that is we get better data systems. So there's less input errors. We get better data coming out that help drive a lot of those decisions. So I talked about how each of these priorities build on each other. So when I look over at Chris Lopez, when he needs data for all those different things he's measuring to help drive outcomes for students, or Dr. Powell for all those different elements, or for the 2 directors for improving middle schools or anything else that happens in schools, we want to make sure those data systems are accurate and they're absolute in every way. So this is a big thing we're embarking on, and it's going to take a number of years to refine it. And systems like this are normally, a 10 to 15-year legacy type system. So the next strategy really that goes under making sure we have more efficiencies, and you might say, why is this one up here? Managing absences due to external professional development. So as Dr. Rao talked about early in as part of the presentation of how we heard feedback. So part of our budget process is we gather a lot of feedback from different folks, a lot of which is from our principals who are managing all those different schools. And one of their major issues is substitutes, and you probably have heard that before, that we can't get coverage. There's a number of certification reductions in the state of Pennsylvania, so that not many people even have the certifications to be in our buildings. But one of the things that we do is we sort of fight amongst ourselves with trying to get substitutes. And what I mean by that is as people have voice and choice to do external professional development, that's what we call it, so traveling outside of the district to go get their learning needs met, it creates an issue between they need substitutes for coverage and then another school's fighting for the same day's coverage. So you can see as more people are going out of the district for their different learning needs, we're fighting more for those internal needs just to service our kids on a day-to-day basis. So this has a price tag annually of about $1.2 million per year that we spend, and that's the cost not only of travel and the conferences, but also the cost of substitutes. So you can see it's pretty significant. So we believe there's an opportunity, and it's not an opportunity to take people's voice and choice away from them. So we want to balance the voice and choice for professional development, because as Dr. Powell said, and as Mrs. Turn said, that's important as we're trying to build our own here in the school district. So we want to still maintain that, but we also want to look at the processes, how we can provide that basic need of having substitute coverage for when it's really needed. So we believe we're going to study that in the next year. We're going to have to talk with a lot of people, see how people plan those different types of professional developments, how we can align that to our absentee data to make sure that we do have substitutes in place, and then ultimately provide a new process, which we think we can save resources. And it may not just be saving resources that people can't go to professional developments. It may just be better aligning how we're sending people out of the district so that substitute coverage is available. So saving maybe just on the substitute cost. We're not sure, and I'll show you how that looks on the financial slide. We're very conservative in our estimates of savings, but definitely believe there's an opportunity there to refine the process, make it better, and provide those basic needs such as substitute coverage, and also allowing for voice and choice for people for professional development. Lastly, we have the district boundary and transportation analysis. We just started that a few months ago. We're getting ready to embark on that with a task force, an external task force that will be members of the board as well. As we study that, again, looking at equitable opportunities for students, we have the initial cost built in the short term. We don't know what the midterm and long term will look like at this point, because that's for the task force to work out, and then for the board to deliberate around what those recommendations may be. So until we get that data back, probably in the next 6 to 8 months, and you can see what those recommendations are, we really won't know what those midterm or long-term implications may be. But it's definitely a strategy that we've been talking about for a year. We finally got the consultant on board, and we've been analyzing data, and we're just about to embark on that task force. So in terms of outcomes, so Stephanie, would you like to talk about the outcomes for talent?
At the end of our projected timeline, we hope that our staff is meeting the expectations that we need, those high expectations that we have set through the board priorities and strategies. We also want to make sure that they're culturally informed, as we said before, and that they better reflect the diversity of our students, not only through race and cultural backgrounds, but also gender, as we saw in the slides. We also want to look at making sure that our positions are filled with internal candidates that have the competencies needed to effectively be successful in these positions. Lastly, we want to make sure that our data is showing that we have increased retention and increased satisfaction and engagement. And all of these strategies, we hope we will see an improved impact in our student outcomes.
School construction renovation, we want to see upgraded facilities for the 21st century learner. School security, we want to make sure that our outcomes, the school entry points are secured. Students, staff, and the community and others feel confident that our schools are safe for not only for their students, our staff feels safe as well, and the community feels the same. Technology infrastructure is available for all students, and the student learning is augmented with digital interactive learning environments. For student information systems, we want to see that enhanced data access for reporting and analysis, reduce reliance on any manual data input, and then real-time information for staff, students, parents, and guardians. So that's all part of that process. For the managing the absences, making sure our substitute fill rate is increased. We can reduce staff absenteeism. And then staff maintain, which is important, voice and choice in their selection of their learning. And then for the district boundary, our outcomes are equitable opportunities for students. School utilization is proportionally balanced, so how are we using our schools for different things such as special education or any type of other programming? And the district systems meet the district needs. So as we're building upon all these different things, we can have the capacity within buildings to do that. So now, questions there?
You look sad, Matt, when I ask a question. My question is around school construction and renovation. And obviously, we're going to have a plan for new construction or renovation. But my question is about maintenance and those big projects that maybe don't fall in either one of those categories. Things like, you know, a new track at the high school, or perhaps things for buildings that are ways down the road in the world of renovation, but are pretty urgent. I mean, I feel like that always falls under something that's a 3 to 5 year plan, because there are going to be those things that need to happen.
So we have that. There's a little bit tonight in terms of some major projects that we have for this summer. And we also have a plan that we can share. I don't have it with us tonight, but we definitely show you what our maintenance plan is, and then how you would use. So right now, we don't budget recurring costs for those types of big maintenance projects. Let's say we budget recurring costs for the Band-Aids, if you will. But we do have opportunities with our fund balance that if there are major things that we want to accelerate, that may be later on the plan, that would be for board discussion. So I think you mentioned like our athletic facilities in some sort. Those right now are not in our plan. So that is something we haven't as a board looked at long-term, you know, such as the stadium or any type of the high school athletic things. So that may be something the board may want to engage. You know, what would those costs be if that's something we think we need sooner rather than later? And then time. So time, really, what also happens is there's only barely 3 months of time in the summer sometimes to get some of these things done. And with all the other, just balancing, we only have so many folks that we can manage and our own folks. So how many projects we can take on in the summer, that's the other challenge for us. It can be done, but we want to do it well. Okay, you want me to, everybody back?
It looks like everybody's
And I
back.
believe Harvey had to step out,
I think
right?
Harvey did step out, he wasn't feeling well, so. Yeah, no, Harvey's gone. He wasn't feeling well.
Okay, very good. Okay, so back on, so you heard about our 4 priorities. And again, I still want to point out that each one of those builds on the other, and then together they work as one. So we talked a lot about over the last months, and you've seen this slide time and time again. If you've been here for a while, you've seen it for a number, probably at least 2 years now. So the budget is not just a bunch of numbers, it's an expression of our values. And the board has talked a lot about that. So we want to be able to express what that budget is and what we're paying for. So not only did you see those priorities, and I believe Dr. Rao pointed this out early, it's not that we're going to stop doing other things. So you're not going to see on these slides coming forward about music and arts programs. We already know that that's a big value here, and we're going to continue to invest in that and make sure that we have the best programs. So all those other things that are underlying what those 4 priorities are, they still are going to happen. It's not that we're stopping school district business. That stuff will still happen. But we know in order to make, you know, definite progress or definite achievement and definite outcomes for kids, we have to align those 4 priorities as one. So let me show you what those investments look like. And let me orient you not only to the slide, but how the slide orients to this big ledger paper that you have here. So all these numbers, so if we're just looking at this first slide for teaching and learning, The importance of the visual piece of it on the slide is to really share with you how much are we investing in those strategies that are going to help with those projected outcomes over time. What you see on the paper are the actual detailed numbers. So if you look down the left-hand side of that big worksheet that says strategic blueprint, you'll see each of those strategies for each of the areas. So just to walk you across the first one, curriculum writing, strategies that Dr. Powell identified. And you can see 9.1.
Your mic is cutting out.
My mic is cutting out. Jay, we should have you around more often. That's nice. Thank you. So just to back on curriculum writing, if you take a look at that, under that strategy, we're going to invest in the short term, which is next year, $150,000 is budgeted to do that curriculum writing. And then in this case, it's $150,000 each year to get to that end result, which Dr. Powell talked about, which eventually having that curriculum review cycle. So once you hit the curriculum review cycle, that doesn't stop. You're going to have continuous investment in curriculum writing year after year after year. That's why you see a steady number there. In improved instruction, you'll see in improving instruction, when you look at the visual, just to orient you again to that slide, that's the biggest piece of blue up on that slide that you see. And you're going to see over time, as we invest in those strategies, those first 3 years is a heavy expense or a heavy investment over those couple of years. And then eventually that should taper off as we build and sustain that. And again, the curriculum review cycle and all those other strategies, you should see the dollars taper off. These visuals are going to ebb and flow each year based on what resources we have in the school district. So we talk about an expression of our values, and we want to do that. But ultimately, at the end of this, we know all the different challenges that we have with the state and funding and what we have challenged with our local funding here. So there's only so much money. But what I do want to point out to you is all these different things that you see on this worksheet, when we show you the revised deficit in about 3 slides, all of these strategies of how we built this are all included in that short term. So our next year, we have everything built in there. So when you see this revised deficit number, you know that everything we put in order of those priorities is baked into that budget. Okay? So when you look at teaching and learning, just to do all those different strategies, you're talking about an investment of, on average, about $3.5 million per year. And again, that'll taper off year 4, eventually coming down, closer to that $2.5 million number. And then it's probably safe to say that if everything was right where we want it to be, and by year 5, you could probably expect anywhere from a $2 to $2.5 million investment to sustain. However, I can probably guarantee you that we're going to have to make some tweaks along the way, and we'll share that with you each and every year as we adjust this blueprint. When you look at student-centered culture and climate, again, looking at that visual piece, you can see the heavy blue is with that equity training. And Dr. Rao talked about how you met with the committee and you saw the price tag of the firm that will come and help us. But what we don't know is what it's going to take to be able to provide all that training and how long it may take. So we've actually increased that budget a little bit more, and you'll see if you look across that equity training line item, I believe the cost of the organization that's going to support us is anywhere from $115,000 to $130,000 a year. We built the cost in at $250,000 because we believe there's probably resources we're going to have to purchase for our staff. There may be times where staff can't do it during the day. We may have to have people outside of the workday and may have to pay them. We're not sure. So we want to make sure that we, again, have enough baked in that we can provide that training. That we may not hit that target. It may come in much less, or some of those resources need to be passed out in future years just based on capacity. But obviously, that's the biggest piece of that visual coming out throughout those years. But again, just to remind you, those dollars are baked into that deficit that you're going to see. Then under community engagement, and this will line right back up to the strategies, a lot of the strategies are happening in more the short to the early midterm, where we're going to make a lot of impact in our community engagement strategy areas. So you'll see in terms of the visual of the investments, a lot of the investments are up front, investing in the website, investing in some communication tools. And that'll taper off slowly over the next couple of years as we still build that in and sustain it. And then you may see, if you went out past year 6, there might be a new investment depending on where we are. But as for right now, our plan would be a heavier investment in year 1, short term, and taper off as we move through the next couple of years. And then lastly is our operational effectiveness. Now, the biggest blue is our debt service, and that's actually shown when you look on this worksheet under school construction. You'll see dollars around $12.6 million. That's actually shown net of the planned con reimbursement. So we have planned to spend $17 million in gross debt service each year. That not only funds our phase 1 projects that are already done, phase 2, and then our phase 3 that we're in. But it also represents any money we're getting back from the state as well, so you show a net cost. But that's the biggest piece of that operational effectiveness, because it's important that we have facilities, and it's expensive. And many of you may have a mortgage or some other kind of financing need in your life, or you may have been there one time and you know that you have to make those payments. And we as a school district, we have to make those debt payments on those loans. And they're to borrow $100 million for 4 projects, and that's pretty much what it costs. It costs us a couple $1,000,000 a year. And then when you add them up over time, we pay them out over 20 years. And then you can see, just to point out visually, the only red that you see represents those potential cost savings under that external PD line item that we talked about. And again, they're very conservative, and they're conservatively low. We hope that we can possibly gain some more leverage and redeploy those savings over time. So it might not necessarily be cutting that from the budget, but being able to take those resources and applying them back to another line item. Again, ultimately saving dollars. But that's one of the important things of this plan that we have, is now that we have priorities aligned with a very comprehensive plan, is the job now is to now start taking a look at where we can start to measure costs and building efficiencies, and where we can be saving money within the district, and measuring that against how do we take that and redeploy it back into these investments. So ultimately saving money for the district, because again, as you're going to see here in a minute, we don't have enough money to fund our current needs without making some different adjustments within the budget. So questions on any of those? Again, the visuals are just meant to show you the capacity of the overall investment for each of those 4 priority areas and each of the different strategies. And then again, you have the detail here of what each of those things would be. If the board's looking for sort of more of the granular detail within each of those strategies, we don't have that here tonight, but we can definitely provide that if that's the board's wish. But let me show you how each, go ahead, Cheryl. Yep.
On the improving of instruction, do you foresee that being additional hiring?
So none of these costs either include people we have on board already, or any of the costs that we have to provide in terms of services. So no, right now, none of these, I believe, just give me a second to make sure I double check. I don't believe any of these have any new hires in them. So these, oh, I'm sorry, you are correct. Go ahead, talk to the mic, please.
So with the, under the improving instruction, under that large strategy, you will see the MYP authorization does include language, world language teachers, because we will implement Spanish across our middle schools. And there are also, you'll also see in the instructional tech plan under Matt's area that we talked about, there's some positions there, and that was in that comprehensive instructional technology plan that was presented to the board. I'm sorry, to the technology plan that was presented to the board 2 years ago. So you will see staff there.
How about in instructional coaches to improve the instruction in the classroom or not? I'm just trying to figure out what the specifics of that are.
Very good. I would suggest that we can bring some specifics for you, because as you know, with the reorganization of the Office of Teaching and Learning, we did earmark dollars for district level coaches. And I'm going to say it's in there because that's part of the work that's already happening in the district.
I'm just writing a note, I'm sorry.
You
Was there
don't
another
have to answer
question?
it now, I'm just curious as to what, it's a big figure,
Right.
2 million.
Right. So all of these under improving instruction, it's the Leadership Academy, Demonstration School for Rigor, that's happening at hand,
Contract.
the MYP authorization piece, so there are positions there for middle school Spanish. Instructional technology integration, there are some, if you think about it, right now, this year, We are, in the middle schools, we're 1-to-1. Next year, we're looking to move 15-to-1 in our elementary schools, which is part of our plan, as well as looking at ninth grade for next year. So our goal is that we're going to move across the years to 1-to-1 throughout the school district. So that work is also, it's also involved here. And then that comprehensive school improvement process, again, that's one of those areas under improving instruction, and there will be costs that are associated with that. But we can break that out at a subsequent meeting. We can break it out more specifically if we need to do that.
Going back to that, okay, I wasn't clear. Thank you.
Can I just ask what the external professional development is? We talk a lot about our PD, and I guess I'm not so familiar with what that is.
Sure. So internal is anything that we're doing here in the district where our teachers, staff members are participating in professional development, but it's held here in the district. External would be, there's a conference that's coming up, and folks request an external PD participation. So case in point, if there's a conference, then that means that teacher or that staff member is not working in the district that day. They're attending that conference, and that's their work day, which is great. That also means that there's a substitute that needs to be assigned to that building for the day. And as Matt mentioned, here are the costs. The costs would be the conference registration, travel, et cetera, for the conference. At the same time, it's also getting a substitute. So if we say that we're all members of different schools around the table, and you send 2 people, and Mary sends a person, and Dr. Rao sends 2 people, and Matt sends 2 people, what we're finding is, yes, we're spending money on giving people voice and choice with respect to their training, which is great, but we're also spending money when it comes to substitutes in those buildings. And what we found is we are creating our own shortage in many ways because we need to have a better system of who's going where and when, so that we're not having these competing forces that at your building you're looking for 3 subs, but so are we, and we're all kind of clamoring for a shortage of substitutes. Even though we know we have building assigned substitutes, which we started to help fit that need, it's one or right, and so it really doesn't meet the needs in each building. So we just have to look at that and determine what's our system, how can we all benefit, and how can we not stress our system by some of the choices that we make, unbeknownst to other buildings that are sending people.
And so most of the rest of our professional development is happening outside of the regularly scheduled day. So, professional development is up here under teaching and learning, and VPDM stuff, that's happening during other times when teachers don't need substitutes.
Right, so the voluntary PD model was structured so that it happens outside of the contractual day. Right? However, there's still PD that happens during the day, but those are when we have district PD days, or we have early dismissal days, and there's PD that's happening in the buildings. But that dollar figure that Mr. Prezara shared is outside of that's actually during the school day, but outside of the district.
Got it. Thanks.
All right. So moving on, let's take a look. So we talked about all those different priorities, talked about the investments that we're making, how they're baked into this whole budget. So if we showed you what the deficit was as we were moving along through the year. And again, when we look at the beginning of the year, we don't know a whole lot. We just take status quo. But now knowing what we know and what we're planning around, what does that do to the overall budget? So we look at a revised deficit. As you look up here, so just to walk you back through this, in October, when we looked at our 5-year look ahead, we had a $3.8 million deficit. Now again, this is before the district does anything with real estate taxes. It's before the governor has any budget in front of us. This is based on just what status quo needs we have. If you remember, we came back in November and we added what we called funds at risk. One big line item of that was $1 million plus to fund the rest of our Phase 3 construction projects, so that was for new debt service. The rest of that was based on a grant that we were losing that was expiring for our school climate transformation that was funding our intervention specialists. So we had that revised deficit of 6.6 in November, and that's what you've been seeing for many months. So as we sort of, we go through and we plan the budget over the last 2 or 3 months, and we refine, we have new contracts approved by the board, so on and so forth. And we put all this in and refine the budget. We're now at a point, it's about another $1.2 million in the opposite direction to bring our deficit to $7.8 million. So again, that's before any new money from the state, any real estate taxes, or any of the budget adjustments that we're going to need to make. So this is when we get back to, this is our challenge here at the School District of Lancaster. We have priorities and we have needs. And we make this plan, and it's a great plan. However, where we run short is now we have to do some things to balance back to the plan. So even though this is the plan, we may have to do some things differently over the next year, which is going to change the plan outright in order to get the budget to balance. So this is just your visual on deficit and taxes. So it's now 7.8. Here's what you get with an Act 1 index. 2.3% gets you $1.7 million of new money. At 3.3%, it gets you $2.4 million of new money. So that's our new target now, $7.8 million. So the board now, you have 3 decision points, none of which you need to decide on tonight. So there's no voting tonight. This is all informational. And then what you do have to do from a decision standpoint legally is have a proposed final budget approved. I believe our May 28th is our date, Mary, is that correct? But the board really has 3 decision points. You have to decide what you're going to do with real estate taxes, whether you use the Act 1 index or the adjusted Act 1 index in order to balance the budget and provide us guidance on where, what is the board willing to tolerate in terms of that real estate tax rate. And that's as high as you can go, 3.3%. You have fund balance, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. So remember, you have fund balance that you can use. We can either use it for one-time costs, such as what we call capital outlay, you'll see here in a slide, or you can use it to balance the budget, or you can put it aside for future needs, whatever that might be. But just a reminder, fund balance is not recurring revenue, so when you do use it, know that over time, we're not building in a steady recurring revenue. So the more you use, the more we're going to have to make up at some point in time. And 3 would be budget adjustments. So that's when you get to your red, yellow, green, or that's how we prioritize using that methodology in order to, and I'll use this blueprint as an example, is what are some things on here, or maybe some other things within the district that we need to reprioritize to maybe make this happen and bring that budget deficit down. So we don't have that tonight, the budget adjustment piece, because that's going to be for next week, because we wanted to give you all this framework of where we're headed. So when we walk into with our prioritized list, you've had some time to digest this amount of information to say, okay, we understand the pathway. How do these budget adjustments align to that pathway? Yes, Randy.
The proposed state budget, are there any additional funds expected to come our way?
Say the first part of your question again. I didn't hear the first part.
I'm sorry, the proposed state budget.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I have that on another slide. So we have some new money coming from the governor. Proposed, correct. So those are your 3 decision points. They haven't changed. They've been the 3 decision points you've had since I've ever been here, and probably the boards before we were ever here. So let's talk about fund balance. This should be nothing new. The last time you probably saw this was in December or November. So you have legal limits on fund balance. So I just want to call your attention to that unassigned number, which at the end of June 30th was $22 million, $22.5 million. The legal limit based on roughly our expenditures are looking to be about $228 to $229 million. You have about a $17 million balance. So when we approve the budget, that's the most you can have in unassigned fund balance. And that's based on an 8% legal limit. So moving to the next slide, in order to get it to that $17 million number, the board needs to make decisions around $4.5 million of that amount. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, you can use it to offset the deficit. You can use it to put towards one-time costs such as roofs or any type of other maintenance needs. Or you can put it in one of those categories that you see up there. And the board did that last year. We moved some money around and we committed some money for security and for some long-term technology needs. And then we have dollars set aside for repairs and maintenance. The student activities is really just a residual of the athletic fund. So know that you have $4.5 million that we have to handle in some way as part of one of your board decision points. Here's one thing that we need fund balance for. And Dr. Desmond was kind of talking to me on the side right before we got back together around a specific need she sort of had mentioned to me prior. But anyway, we have from our unrestricted use, so that $4.5 million, and the board has done this the last 2 years. We've been replacing roofs on schools, and this is what Dr. Desmond talked to me about on the side was, what are we doing about those schools that are not on that long-term construction plan or they're way out there? So this is exactly that. Now, it's not that we're not investing in JP. JP and East were renovated in the mid-90s, but they're going to come around on that cycle. They're going to need some improvements at some point in time. But mainly right now, JP's roof is enormous. So 2 summers ago, we did a portion of the roof. We need to go back and do another portion, and then there's another portion after that. And each one of those portions is about $1.3 million. So this is planned for this summer. And again, we have to time it based on how we run summer programs because we don't want to be doing roof work while the kids are in the one building. So we rotate campus buildings each year. And then King Elementary, which is a school that's way out on the horizon for renovation. We've been putting enough Band-Aids on that roof for quite some time. Mr. Lopez can probably attest to that, as he used to get water pouring into his office and on his secretary's desk, and I saw the tarps that used to be in there. So that roof's at a point of no return. So $1.9 million of one-time cost to go against that $4.5 million. These dollars are not built into that budget deficit at this point. But this would be, if we put them in, we would ask that the board use fund balance as one-time costs, similar to what you did the last 2 years. And then under that committed line item of fund balance, so again, I highlighted earlier that the board made a commitment of $1 million of security. We have these safety and security needs that we have sort of queued up for this summer as part of that preliminary plan that we showed the board. It's probably been probably last summer in August is when we showed you that plan and what it would cost to start to do certain safety and security needs. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail because I don't want to expose ourselves publicly with what some of these items are, but we can share that in an executive session, which is now under the legal guidance. But in broad terms, J.P. McCaskey, Cameras, Carter McRae doing the entry points, Hamilton and Phoenix. Ross, even though a renovated school, just didn't have all the appropriate card access, and then Wheatland with the entryway. And again, won't go into detail, but these would be improved. The significant cost here would be improving entry points for schools that are far out, but are still in need of having that same opportunity to have safe and secure environment for the schools. So that's only $300,000. That would not come out of that unrestricted use. That would come out of that specific $1 million. So again, the board identified that we would build those dollars into the budget and then have them be paid for directly with fund balance, because we would not need the recurring revenue for those year after year. The next slide, just to orient you to this slide, is what we call the fund balance planning snapshot. So what this slide represents, a few years ago, a board member had asked us to put this together as you're planning. So what this slide represents is each year we have a total fund balance that we're planning around. And you can see on that first line of the graph, in the table below the graph, each year of what we had during the budget process, how much fund balance we had. So we had 14-15, we had 16.8, 15-16, we had 22 million, so on and so forth. The teal color on the bar graph, which is our projected deficit. So you can see 14-15, we were dealing with just as much significant deficits in the past, and we've had to make different and difficult decisions to get to where we are today. But $9 million, $7 million, 7.8, and then we had 2 years of 3.6s, and then it's cropping back up to 7.8 again. And then what our plan usage was, which is probably the most important part, as well as the line. So the plan usage is how much fund balance did the board use to balance the budget each year. And then that last part of the table, the plan uses a percentage of the deficit, is how much of that fund balance was used against the deficit. So when you look at the actual visual, you can see each of the bar graphs are represented by each of those different, either the deficit or the fund balance. But on the right-hand side, the secondary axis where you see the line, that represents the percentage of fund balance, percentage of the deficit you used with fund balance. So in very simple terms, over the last 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and while using 1920 as a part of that, the average has been the board has used 20% of the deficit with fund balance to balance the budget. Does that make sense, everyone? So that's just really to give you a guide and a trend of what the board's been doing year after year and how you have been using fund balance responsibly. It doesn't mean you have to do that, but it just gives you a guide to plan around. So that's the purpose of that slide.
Could you say the words one more time?
Sure.
Just say the words that you used to describe that.
So I'll try.
Try.
Really what that represents is each year we have a deficit, and then we have these fund balance reserves sitting out there. Keeping in mind that they're not recurring revenues and we need some revenue to balance the budget. The board had asked years ago and said, if we're going to start to use fund balance to balance the budget, can we start to look at a compass, if you will, or a gauge that says how much are we using year to year, because we don't want to be irresponsible with the fund balance. So is there a guide that shows us what our trends has been? If we have a certain deficit, how much as a percentage of that deficit are we using of fund balance? So you can see the amount's not the same, it's just the percentage is the same, or roughly the same. There's a little anomaly here there with the 8%. Again, just to give you a guide, so again, we have fund reserves, so you can use them. We don't, you don't want to sit on them. There's different ways we can use them. The board also put, over the last couple of years, you've put $12 million aside in a capital reserve fund. That's not shown on this slide. So you have that for future, projects as well. So you've done a lot of good long-term financial planning. So, and probably it'd be best, I don't have it tonight, but we can bring it next week, is to show you what all your fund balances are, all those different funds, and just review that again. That's part of the slideshow in November, or in December in the audit. So if I can refresh that data again for you. But I guess what you really asked me is, the board's been using 20%, whatever 20% of the deficit is each year, you've been using that amount of fund balance to fund it. Is that what you wanted me to say again?
Yeah, sort of.
All right.
Yes, right. Thank you.
Looking at the next slide, balancing the budget, and this is the one you normally see during the month of May. This gets back to your question, Randy, is what new money do we have? So the top line represents the new revised deficit of $7.8 million. So what this slide represents is, what if we plug in all the new money the governor has proposed, both for basic education and special education? So you can see on those line items for basic ed, this is maxing it out. We are only going to get $1.2 million in new basic ed money, which is only 1.94% increase. 4.79% on special ed, and I wouldn't get too excited about special ed. That hasn't really increased in a decade. Very small, unmeasurable for us. And then if you max out your Act 1 index at 3.3%, you would get $2.4 million. You see the next line item, which is green. Now that gets populated when we go through our red, yellow, green exercise, which we're going to do next week as we start to prioritize what things do we need to put in, what things do we need to take out in order to try to get that number closer to zero, which is our ultimate goal there at the yellow. The one right before the yellow, the fund balance utilization, that's assuming if you use 20% based on the scale we just showed you, it would be 1.5 million. So what this does for you is, these are all if you assume governor's budget, you assume you're going to max the taxes out to the Act 1 index, and you assume we use 20% fund balance, we would still have a $2.1 million gap to fill. So what happens with this slide is we do that red, yellow, green. This is interactive, so we can do things on the fly. The board can see different variations. And you've done it before, some of you board members that have been here, we can move the tax rate up and down. You can see what it does. But that's just a visual that that'll be our guide or our compass for the next couple of weeks as we try to get to that May 28th date.
On the fund balance utilization of 1.5 in
Yep.
this slide, is that fund balance utilization of unrestricted fund balance, or
It's
is
unrestricted only, yes.
so that does not contain the, for example, 300,000 that you're
It does
proposing
not.
for the security?
No.
Okay.
So to do the math, if we put all that capital A into the budget, that would increase by what, 2.2 million? So that deficit would go up 2.2 million, but then we would just show it being 2.2 of it would be secured by unrestricted fund balance and the committed fund balance. So you'd be right back at 7.8 again. Yes.
Use my mic. So instead of 2.475 million, if we raise taxes 3.3%, if we did 2.3%, it's 1.7 what?
Just 1.7 and some change.
Around 1.7? Okay.
So one of the big things that's not all in here is when we meet with different stakeholders within the district and we do what's called these staffing meetings, we have all these different requests that are happening, and then how do we line it back to the priorities. This is what you see on the next slide, and we can speak to these, but they're not meant for, are we putting them in or out of the budget tonight? This is what we have on the board in terms of actual position needs in the district. And let me just point a few of them out. So there's some special ed. When you look down, exceptional student specialist, autistic support, personal care educator. Those are all related to autistic support classes and special ed needs at the high school. Again, we don't want to get in detail about that tonight. I'm just going to give you a broad overview because we're going to work these into that priority list next week, because we need to put some of these positions and take some of them out, and again, and balance some other needs within the district. Yet the world language teachers, which Carol talked about, as already being part of that. There's an intervention specialist you see there that we'll have to reduce them based on the grant. We have a college career recruiters based on our college and career readiness. Community education liaison possibility at the campus of a reduction. And then to offset the intervention specialists, we were looking at coordinators of school climate. And then that big number that you see, because I don't want you to walk away and be like, holy cow, what's that mean? So when you see minus 16 grade level teachers, that doesn't mean 16 people are losing their jobs. So what that means, and what happens from year to year, is our enrollment shifts. So as we meet with staff, we look at an average of 25 students to one teacher on average. So when we just do the math calculations and say, okay, there's some what we call bubbles in different schools as the enrollment's going up and down, just based on the pure math, if we try to stay to an average of 25 to 1, in the grade levels, and what we mean by grade levels, the elementary levels, there could be an overall reduction of 16 teachers based on the math. And what that doesn't tell you is what happens in any given year if more students show up. So right now we're on a small dip on enrollment. Most of the enrollment, if you remember John Lishner back early in the year when they were talking about the new schedule at the high school, the enrollment is getting pushed up. The maximum enrollment is up in the high school levels. So those bubbles are moving up through the middle school. They're now entering the high school. So the high school is probably not at its peak capacity. In the next 2 years, it'll be at its peak capacity, and then it'll taper off again. And that's what happens in the school district of Lancaster. You get these sort of waves of enrollment that move through the district and then taper off. And that's where we are right now. We had that same sort of taper off back in 2011 where we dipped below 10,700 students or 10,800 students. So it looks like we're on that trajectory right now. Part of the work of the district boundary study is updating those enrollment projections. So that's out there as well. So I wouldn't get overly excited about the minus 16. We wanted to share with you and be transparent around, hey, this is kind of what's out there in terms of the world of positions, in terms of as we look at our staff meetings, what the needs are, and as they align back to, special ed has, you could call that compliance, or you can also call it as part of the TSI process in terms of enhancing the school. And it's really about serving kids because those numbers are moving up. And we'll give you some more detail on that next week. I just want to give you a real broad brush of that tonight. And then we talked about that instructional technology coach. Yep.
these included in the deficit that you're talking about,
So.
or not, or are they separate?
So
right
I
now?
need to cross-check with something Dr. Powell said around being in those other numbers, because I don't, so right now, these positions are not in the
Oh,
deficit.
they aren't, unless the
According
world
to my
language
math,
academy.
so, no, they're not in the world language as well. I need to double-check that math. I'm pretty sure that they're not, but I can verify that for you. I'll have it as early as tomorrow.
Just as a point of clarification, the previous question that Director Desmond asked was, will we need to hire any staff? Which was not, is the math in there? So I answered the question
yes.
that there's staff associated.
Yes.
But he's the numbers guy.
Yeah, so that I can guarantee you that these positions are not in the budget.
Okay, I have another question. Does our fund balance exceed the legal limit when all of this is done?
So if we use fund balance, we have to use fund balance in some
Right.
way
Yeah.
to get below the legal limit. We have to do that. If you just plug fund balance into the deficit, yeah, we'd be below the legal limit.
No, I thought because on page 61, it looks like the legal limit is 17,009.
17 million just for unassigned, and I put that back up on the board for the audience to see as well.
Right, and yet right now we're at 29.
We're at 22.
20.
So just look across the unassigned. 29 is the total of all those different
Oh.
categories. You can't do
Okay.
anything with non-spendable. That's sort of
So
like an accounting entry.
So I'm just doing this quickly, maybe 4 million is
4
above.
on the next slide there, if you go, it's $4.5 million that we need to do something with. So
But you're only suggesting using 1,900.
I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just showing you that the trend for the board of the last couple of years as a guide has been 20% of the deficit, which this year would be $1.5 million.
But our fund balance continues to rise,
It
even
is-
though you keep 20% as
Correct.
an even
Correct.
amount. And we could exceed
We
the
could-
legal limit.
Absolutely. You can exceed that 20%
Well,
that we got.
yes, yeah.
You just have to be below that 20%.
17.
So you have to do something at least with that 4.5 million at the very minimum. So you could put that all in against the deficit. You could, well, part of that we're going to recommend that use for the capital outlay, the roofs. So that would be 1.9. But again, it doesn't mean you can't use more than that 1.5 of the 20%. Yeah. Again, these are, what we're really trying to sum this up with tonight is, here's all the tools in your toolbox, and we'll get back to those board decision points of, we have to get to zero at some point. And these are our challenges with all those different things.
Matt, I got a question.
Sure.
The positions that might be eliminated, is there enough normal turnover in the staff on a regular basis that it would not create a problem? I mean, how many elementary teachers do you usually hire in a year?
We would probably not have to furlough anyone.
That's what I'm getting at, yeah.
There's a good number of retirements, and then we normally have natural attrition through the summer. If need be, again, if need be. That would be the maximum amount we can move if we just use pure math. That doesn't mean that's what we believe in doing, but again, we also have a deficit we need to fulfill. Because we really talked as a team about there's an opportunity to leverage the smaller class sizes right now in those foundational grades. When Dr. Powell talked about a culture of reading, or culture of literacy, culture of literacy. Great opportunity, if we can afford it, to really leverage that opportunity of small class sizes and get some more individualized instruction or whatever those other techniques are to help support our students.
Well, the point of my question was I don't have a good handle on what normal turnover is, so.
We normally rotate, I don't want to say rotate, normal turnover for us is anywhere from 6 to 8% per year, and that's throughout all our positions. I mean, we've had some years it's been 9, but normal, I would say 7 to 8%. But that would be all staff. She can probably fine-tune it down to a teaching turnover. We give you that data normally in August every year. So nothing to do with this tonight. Just know that you'll see this with, we can answer any questions, but there'll be some more backup with this, especially around the special ed figures and the need for those positions, and then how we're going to prioritize some of those positions within the big mix here. Did you have a question, Mara? No. Oh, I thought I saw you.
Can I just say one more thing?
You sure can.
I just want to say it out loud. Mara mentioned it earlier, that athletic facilities are in bad shape. And so I've been sort of waiting for that fund balance number to pop up. And, I mean, we know that it's not wise to spend fund balance on recurring costs, but, you know, we have to balance the budget. But we have some fund balance there to spend, and we have athletic facilities that are seriously degraded. Our high school track and our one middle school track are, like, in really bad shape. Yeah, so it's something that I have been thinking, it's been rolling around in my head. I mentioned it to Matt. He said, you know, maybe that's something for fund balance. So I just wanted to say it out loud.
So on the fund balance slide 62, comparing it to, I think our numbers are different than yours, actually. Yes. So on the fund balance slide where it shows that we're 4.5 over. Yes, that one. You're in the current budget numbers that yield a $2.1 million deficit. You're suggesting spending, or at least you're not suggesting, but these numbers are generated by using 1.5 million of that 4.5, using 300,000 of the security, of the 1 million assigned security, using 300,000 of that in the budget, right? But in the overall budget projection for what you're spending in 1920, you're suggesting this number says spend 1.5 million of the unassigned.
Correct.
And spend 300,000 of the committed security.
Correct.
Is there, and 0 of the 2.5 for tech?
Right now, there's nothing coming out of the tech, right?
Great. I was just trying to like line item out that.
So you know, and I can simplify that again, because now we're getting into a new realm that we haven't done, like starting to spend down committed, or that's the recommendation. So we haven't had these discussions in the past because we haven't had the resources to be able to do it. So we can simplify that a little bit. But you can move, so just so you know, just how the fund balance works under committed, which you have security and technology. Those are new commitments you made just last June. You can move them again. They don't have to stay there. The only way you can move it is the board just has to do a resolution and say, I want to take the $1 million from security and put it into something else. Or if you're going to spend it, you just have to do, that's just the formality of how you have to do that. So I just wanted to point that out. Go
ahead. It would have to move to a committed line, though, because we couldn't move it back to uncommitted because we're 4.5 over anyway.
You can. So, for example, if you said, "Hey, we don't believe we're going to fund technology with recurring budget dollars every year. We don't want to have that line item," so you can uncommit that and move it to unrestricted, and then immediately spend it on other things. Yeah.
Immediately move it out to capital expense.
Correct. Okay. You can. If you wanted to do all that in one way. But unfortunately, you have to go through the bureaucracy of the paperwork and of the resolution. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We have to go through the votes. You have to go
Excuse me, Matt, didn't we commit that $1 million for this year?
You committed it just in perpetuity until such time we either spend it down.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought we had $1 million to spend from this year's budget.
There's no time limit on that $1 million. You can do it
now,
next year, whenever. You have it as a board to say, we committed it for that purpose, and we're going to, however that needs to be spent, we'll spend it on that purpose. Now, if we determine, let's say we go through all the projects for security and we only spent $600,000 and there's 400 left, I would come to you and say, hey, we don't have anything else in the tank to spend it on. What do you want to do with that 400? And then you could say either leave it or move it. So for 10 years, almost 10 years, we had a line item committed for PSER's expense, and we never did anything with it. We saw it on the balance sheet, if you will. And that's when we came last year and we said, look, PSER's is kind of at the max. We haven't been using it to fund PSER's offsets. We've been making budget adjustments. now will be a good time to move it out and put it somewhere where you need it. And that's what you did last year. So if you remember, technology plans, $1 million a year, as you can see across this big ledger paper. So you could use part of that technology to offset this technology, the portion of what the deficit we determined to be for technology expense. I mean, we could.
So on the big ledger here, the technology expenses, they are part of our recurring costs budgets.
Correct.
And this 2.5 million is a separate pot of money. It's
Separate
from-
pot of money, but we could say, so that deficit is 7.8 million. 900, if you're looking at the short term under that technology on the paper here, just to keep everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
So if you go down towards the bottom, we could say, we're going to take 952,000 out of that 2.5 million line item to fund that portion of the deficit.
Right,
You follow me?
yes. It's still like spending fund balance on recurring costs.
It is,
though.
but remember, it is.
Yeah,
But that was, I can remember Randy particularly brought that sort of issue up last year. So you have to,
I mean, we're still going to come back next year and have that next amount, which is 1.5.
that's our challenge.
Yeah, right.
Our challenge is, well, the bigger challenge is back on that state side.
Yep.
But we don't want to get into that tonight. We really need $3 million a year from the state to come on a minimum. So you're dealing with $1 or $2 million in deficit, and there's some work we have to do on our end now that we have this plan, and we start to align resources differently in the district. This will make it much more strategic for us and make our decisions a little bit, much more aligned, so we can start to either redeploy assets, like either stop doing some things or stop spending money on things we shouldn't be doing anymore, and saying, okay, this is the best practice to help support MTSS or some of those other things. Put the money over there, and we need to stop doing some things.
Matt,
Yes.
I see on your fund balance planning slide, there's a assigned repairs and maintenance, $2.75 million. Couldn't we use that for things like roofs and tracks? And
You sure can.
I don't know how much it costs to fix a track, but
I know the last time we looked at the Wheatland track, it was about a little over $1 million.
Of course, that's a complete redo of a, what do they call it? A cinder track, whereas, and I know.
So I mean, looking at that was actually, I was wondering about that line, because you did say is that residual from an athletic something or another? That 2.7, that repairs and maintenance, 2.75?
That's just what the board, we assigned based on
Okay.
years of time. So
Yeah.
again, $2 million on a $230 million budget is peanuts. We can
Yeah.
spend that on a Friday.
Well, I guess I'm thinking, though, that, I mean, this is supposed to be a 3 to 5 year process. That's why we're all here. So I think it really is important to look at your maintenance, what you're looking out, So I know you said you don't have that tonight, but maybe that would be good for next week, or at some point, I think we should see that. I mean, there are things like the heat in the buildings. We talked about that. Obviously, those buildings, it's going to continue to get hot twice a year, and they're not getting new buildings or air conditioning in the next year. So those are some expenses. Maybe they're not huge expenses, but I think that's worth, looking at. And also, just a really quick comment, we were in Harrisburg for Advocacy Day talking about cyber school reform, and what did we say, 2.4 million we pay out a year?
PSBA had us at
Yeah, we were up talking to.
$2.4
yeah.
million we spend on.
And it really, that 2.4 becomes super real when you look at these things, that's for
On
sure.
on cyber charter.
2.4 leaves the district every year to go to the cyber schools. Yeah. I mean, obviously, we have an expense for our own in-house, but as we pointed out to them, we're doing this much more efficiently and, of course, much, much better, so.
Unfortunately, I think what we also learned yesterday was
Yeah.
that even if that change happens, it's not going to change for this fiscal year. Right. There was not good news around PlanCon either.
Yeah. There wasn't a lot of good news at all yesterday.
Harrisburg was in doubt.
A lot of words.
Yeah, I know Matt said he doesn't want to get into the state, but it is worth recognizing that I think we did the worst in the county in terms of percentage increase and one of the worst in the state. So for all the talk about the increased funding in education, it isn't being felt in our district, and that's worth noting when we're talking about the budget and letting our constituents know. On a more numbers level, so when I look at this strategic blueprint, one thing I notice is that for the strategic blueprint investments at 18 million for 1920, it actually goes down to 16.7 in 23-24. So there are costs that roll off of this plan, and it is perhaps worth looking at some of those places where those costs are rolling off and thinking about those places as responsible places to spend fund balance. I know it's a really small cost; it's only $80,000, but the website is like a one-time cost, right? In here, and so some of those places, there might be places where it feels more responsible to spend fund balance.
It's an excellent point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rather than spend them in things that are going to reoccur in costs, right? And ideally, if we improve branding and communication and advocacy, we can get some of those students who are leaving in cyber charters to return to our district, and that money comes back to us, so we can think of those also as somewhat investments with fund balance to improve our.
You know, similarly for the security line. So the security line here on the strategic blueprint has recurring costs. That's in the deficit, the way you have it coming out, and it's
So-
not in our fund balance committed security line.
So let me clarify on, that's a good one that you highlighted. That one would be the one-time cost coming out of that committed line item.
It is?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not clear on here, but that's how that's
No,
designed.
so we can't say
Yeah.
that.
But
Sorry.
that is the only item on this that is.
That is
right?
the only one on there, so I should probably highlight that or put an asterisk.
That's a much better way of asking what I was trying to ask earlier.
Because I looked at that $1 million at the end and I thought, yes!
I think what I'm getting is, I'm getting an understanding of, hey, there's some resources up there on that slide for other reasons, but how can we use them in different ways? That's all under the board's discretion, for the most part. Other than non-spendable and the student activities, those are, which is the most minimal amounts, $338,000. All the rest of that, so basically $24 million, you have the discretion to do things with. I would just caution you, you know, we don't want to spend it all in one year. So, but you can be very strategic over time to use it in different ways. With always our goal is to try to come out ahead of, we're trying to increase fund balance every year, and not by cutting and burning things. We're trying to say we're being responsible spenders. We have processes in place to make sure that we have controls for spending. People are spending within the required time frame. So you see me every month get up and say, hey, we're right on target in terms of our spend. That's where we try to keep people aligned to the process of get resources in schools for when you need them. Don't just go to the store in April because we're shutting the budget down that you're just going to go buy a bunch of stuff. So get things for what we need it for, and get it for the time frame that you need it for. So we have a lot of checks and balances in place. Again, and then there's a lot of things that happen. Sometimes we get lucky, like when the Plan Con was deferred for a couple years ago. That's how some of that fund balance grew. They deferred the money, deferred the money, deferred the money. We were making adjustments to balance the budget, and then boom, we get a one-time shot of $4.5 million out of nowhere. So.
The state still owes us
What?
over $1 million.
For transportation, if you remember, so for the transportation audit back in January of 18, so there's $1.5 million that the state still owes us back from, it's really from years ago. So we think that might be an opportunity to plug that money into the budget too. It's a little bit of a risk. It's going to require us to pound on the doorstep of the state to say we need our money. But that would be part of next week's discussion as we show you the adjustments. Because I want to keep you aligned to, we can go off on a lot of different conversations here. I think one of the things I'll do is try to explain fund balance to you a little bit more, just kind of to summarize this conversation of how you can use those different ones in different ways.
Just one other one that I wonder
Sure.
if we could think about as, I mean, we've got it spread out over 5 years here on the big spreadsheet, but I wonder if we could think about, I'm looking at equity training, If we could think about that as, even though it's spread out over 5 years and it's something we're all committed to, I wonder if that comes up to just about $1 million, if we could think about that as sort of a one-time expense, even though it's over 5 years, and it doesn't need to be in recurring. And I don't know, I guess part of it needs to be thinking about what that equity training entails, and does it go beyond that, the life of that 5-year body of work? You know what I mean?
Well, then I would say it probably does, but maybe not to that extent. But maybe you put some of the more significant costs as we can assign fund balance and just have it pull from there each year and spend it down. What you're saying is kind of spend it down over 5 years from fund balance.
It's a suggestion, something to think about as you're planning that with the equity design team.
Yeah, things like, that was the other line I was going to talk about. Things like the trainer, where that might be a one-time cost that's up front. We have an ongoing cost of always training staff at $100,000 a year, but the trainer's a one-time cost, so that might be a place.
The upfront work.
Yeah, because that's the one line that steps down.
Something to
Yeah,
think
those, I think we've had conversations about fund balance in the past, and often we've thought about one-time costs as material one-time costs. But I think there are, like this equity trainer, consulting one-time costs that it could be responsible to use fund balance for.
I follow you.
Maybe you're going to talk about this next week, but in the culture of literacy, do we have a contract with the American Reading Company each year? Is that why that is so high, or is that for the purchase of the books for the kids? And I know it's being extended to 6th and 8th grade, so just curious about what that means.
So that contract includes materials, it includes coaching. As you may recall, with the work that we're doing with ARC, the American Reading Company, there's shoulder-to-shoulder coaching with teachers, with leaders, and that's also a big part of the work, as well as the professional development. So it's not just the materials or resources, it's also those other expenses that I mentioned that are used to help build the skills of our teachers and leaders.
And on that note, is improve instruction and curriculum writing, that's LSI, a lot of it?
Curriculum writing is the work that we're doing with our partnership with LSI.
Okay.
And improving instruction, again, it goes back to several of those items that we mentioned that
Right.
include instructional tech,
MYP.
the things that are listed previously in the PowerPoint.
Okay, thanks.
The boundary study also is another place. It's a one-time cost, right? The boundary study, it's not a material one-time cost, but it's a resource one-time cost.
Any other questions on that? Otherwise, I have like 2 more slides, or 3 slides.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you've seen this before. How do we prioritize? I won't read through this, but next week, our plan would be, okay, we have this deficit. We need to prepare and bring to you our budget adjustments to try to get us closer to that 7.8, trying to get that closer to 0. So again, tonight was really about getting the framework in place so you can see how we're aligning our resources now on the big priorities that'll help align and streamline the work that we're doing. Here's just a picture of the snapshot of what we've done with our Act 1 index and tax increases. So again, just to orient folks in the audience to the slide. The bars across the graph represent how high the real estate tax increase was each of those years. The gray shaded bars represent years where the board approved a resolution not to exceed the Act 1 index. Then the blue purplish line you can see represents the base index, and the lighter blue line represents the adjusted index. So the last 3 years, the board has come under the base index. Prior to that, it's been, you had a year where you touched the base index, but normally it's been, on average, probably closer to the adjusted index back over time. So just keep that in mind. That's a good historical picture of what we've done. So your key takeaways and your next steps. So again, just to remind you on the deficit and taxes, we're at 7.8. Here's what the taxes will do, as we just talked about. And then the board has these 3 decision points. So you just had some good preliminary discussion on that. Real estate taxes, not so much, but you kind of understand where we're going. Fund balance. And then budget adjustments will be the work of next week. So next week, we're going to have to put that in, dovetail it in, which is the first committee of the whole work session. Is there one next week? Am I saying that correctly, Mary? There's a meeting next week. So the plan would be to try to do over the next 2 meetings, we hash all this out. But this is the bulk of everything that's in the budget. And then next week we'll be able to share with you how we visualize the numbers if you want to see it, on how it gets displayed to the public and the reporting part of it as well. But we don't want to put too much out until we know where we're ending up.
I would like to commend you because I don't know, this may be my 4th budget now, and this 3 months of work that you did in preparation for the red, green, and yellow really lays out a much better picture of what that is. Before, we just used to decide what we were going to keep or not keep, but now we have the whole plan in place. It makes a lot more sense, I think, going in.
Commend to the team. So we've, I probably commandeered a lot of what the superintendent probably wanted to do back in January and February, but by doing this, it helped us really, I think, galvanize the work that we're trying to do here. And we've had a lot of great conversations, some difficult conversations around what the work is and focusing and what's really happening. And we're rolling this out to our principals. We met with principals last week and gave them the presentation. So really just taking all the different, we have the district improvement plan, we have school improvement plans, get all these different things, but how do you bring it all together and really get people to say, this is really what we're trying to do? And again, all leading back to the strategic priorities. So it's not the work that Matt did, it's the work that this team did, and there's so many other people behind all that to help us get here that I wish I could name them. If I had a staff roster, I would. You should have that with you at all times. So we can thank their particular people. But we appreciate that comment. Thank you very much.
The one thing I noticed is a fair amount of this information we've gotten before in bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
In my almost 8 years on the board, this is the first time I've seen it all come together in one place. And of course, it makes a whole lot more sense when it's laid out in a logical order like that. So I want to echo what she said and tell you I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, we hope it makes for a better decision-making process, because it's hard. The budget itself is actually, I think Kim Reynolds is over there somewhere, my assistant. I think we have 20 or 33,000 actual line items. So it's probably more than that. So it's pretty significant to try to pull all those details and all those different line items together in a place that makes sense for people to understand.
And especially the sort of grouping of the things in like 4 areas. And so when we're thinking about budgeting and what, where we're cutting, it helps us to really say like, okay, this is spending that is supposed to go towards this goal, and like help us to think about it in that way. Presentation is really good.
So I believe that's all we have in terms of. Are you pointing at me? Oh. It'd be any kind of public comment at this point or any other discussion the board would have.
That's right. I'm sorry, I'm still thinking about things.
I'm going to shut this off.
Since you're officially finished. Yeah, my mic's on. I stopped turning it off because it was too confusing. Now's the time that we can open it up to the floor if the board is indeed finished with their questions. If there's anybody in the audience who would like to ask a question, I think mostly. Well, is there anybody there who wants to comment before Tim kills himself over this one? I think it's mostly employees. I don't know if anybody in the audience knows this, but our 3 folks over here are running for school board in this election coming up in November. These are potentially our new colleagues, so they were encouraged to come tonight. Yeah, yay! Thank you.
think you have any comments.
So it looks like we don't have any comments, unless Tim had one. Did you have something to say? All right, well, on that note, again, thank you very much for this comprehensive examination, and we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Carol's gonna go home and get her